Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I've been waiting for a long time, and finally I've got him here. Mark Devlin is here. He is a UK-based DJ, a music journalist. He is also the author of Musical Truth, Volume 1 and 2. He also has a radio show on Spreaker that is called The Sound of Freedom. And without further ado, Mark, welcome. Welcome to Night Flight.
Are you saying I'm a difficult person to get hold of here, Judith?
No. I'm happy we finally made it. You know, I know.
I do have a bit of a waiting list, sadly. The waiting list is usually a few weeks long, but I'm glad we got here in the end.
Yeah, okay, we did. So, Mark, working in the music industry for so many years, can you recall the point where you thought something is wrong here? There's something going on that does not really sit well with me.
Well, it was a gradual process with me. There wasn't a singular event that I can point to as having woke me up. It happened over a number of years. And it was as the 2000s started to unfold, the early 2000s. So I'd been a DJ since 1990. And I loved the 90s. I had an absolute ball in the 90s, you know, just on a personal basis. Life was so much fun for me then. It was just one big party. I loved the music. I loved the culture. I just loved the times. I was completely ignorant to truth, of course. In the 90s, I had no idea that anything nefarious was going on in the world. I just thought the world was this normal, sane place. But as the 90s transitioned into the 2000s, the music that I played started to change. So I was known for playing hip hop and black music like R&B, soul, funk, these styles of music, reggae. And anyone that went through those times will tell you that the production methods and the lyrical content and the overall style of that music really did change. And it was degrading. It wasn't progressing. It was regressing. It was just getting worse. And it was becoming very debased in terms of the themes that were coming through in the lyrics. The records didn't sound as good as they used to. The production methods had degraded. And I noticed this happening. I probably picked up on it around 2004, 2005. And a couple of years after that, I started paying attention to other things that were going on in the world. So my dad was a big influence on me in that area because he'd always been a prodigious reader. And he always had, whenever I went around to see him, he'd have a big pile of books by the side of his armchair, about 20 books. And if ever that pile of books fell on him, they would kill him instantly, you know, because they're that heavy. So he used to put me on to different authors. And he got me reading the works of David Icke, which I'd never paid attention to up to that point. I had memories of David Icke from the early 90s, from that famous Wogan interview that he did, which was very humiliating for him and had the whole nation laughing at him and thinking he was a nutter. And I unfortunately bought into that because at the time I was programmed and conditioned just like everyone else. So when my dad said, you should read this book by David Icke, I was like, oh, that nutter, that crazy guy from the BBC. But I stuck with it on his recommendation. And this book made a whole load of sense to me. I think the first one I read was Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center Disaster, which is all about 9/11. And then I got on to what was his new book at the time, and this would be 2010, which was Human Race, Get Off Your Knees. And I absorbed that book in one go on a trip that I made to New York in September of 2010. And everything that had been playing on my mind up to that point and all these questions that I had about what was really going on in the world all sort of coalesced and came together and made sense all at once when I read that book. It's like all the pieces to the jigsaw puzzle had fallen into place. And I came back from that trip with a new understanding of why I'd had all these questions, why things didn't feel right in the world, why the music industry was degrading. And it wasn't just the music industry because it's every other aspect of human life. And that book answered a lot of questions for me. And so I pinpoint that time as when I underwent my conscious awakening, and life has never been the same since. So I'm 9 years deep in this game now, and it's like the veil was lifted from my eyes. And I could see the world for what it really was. It's like putting on the sunglasses in They Live in the movie, right?
Yeah.
And so that's been my my existence for the last 9 years. And very quickly after that, I realized that I had to start taking some personal responsibility myself for my own contribution to the truth-seeking process to enable others to come to these realizations. And I realized the best way I could do that as a DJ, as a radio host, as a journalist, was to use the skills that I had to try and wake other people up and convey truthful information. So shortly after that, I started doing my Good Vibrations conversation-based podcast. I started doing my Sound of Freedom conscious music podcast. And eventually that led to the publications of my 2 books that you just mentioned, which brought together everything I'd come to understand about how the corporate music industry is completely controlled and is used for mind control and social engineering and culture creation. That's its job. That's why it was invented. It's a harsh truth for people to come to an acceptance of, but it doesn't make a difference whether you accept it or not, believe it or not. It's the truth.
Yeah. So you already mentioned something, and a lot of people have that feeling that music has degraded. And some others say, oh no, that's just because you're getting old. You do not.
Yep, you always hear that one.
Yeah, but you have that impression as well from a professional point of view.
Oh, definitely. As a DJ, you pay very close attention to records because it's your job to do that. You're always working out how you can put a set together and make it flow, how you can create a mood and an atmosphere in a club when you're playing, and how you can mix 2 records together. So you pay very close attention to the structure of the beats and the production style, and inevitably you're paying attention to the lyrical content as well. And there's no question that it's degraded. Anyone that's been around in the hip-hop scene for as long as I have is going to tell you that what passes for hip-hop now bears absolutely no relation to what it was in the 90s. The period from round about 1988 to about 94, 95 is considered the golden era in hip-hop. That's when the very best material was coming out. And I was so grateful to be a part of things then. But from 95, 96 onwards, anyone that was active in that scene will tell you that there was a degradation in what was being put forward. And I've gone into some detail in my books as to the social engineering aspects of what was going on. The most obvious play out of that is with the genre known as gangster rap. And I've detailed this agenda that was in place in the early 90s, where the major record labels at the time were in collusion with each other to deliberately change the fabric of rap music so that what you were getting in the lyrics consistently through all the mainstream output was a glorification of criminal lifestyles, talking about gang banging and pimping and selling drugs and all this. And the idea there was to get the impressionable, naive, young, primarily males that listen to this music, adopting petty criminal lifestyles themselves in emulation of their rap music heroes. The idea there was to completely degrade and debase the social conditions of those times, but also to provide a never-ending supply of inmates for the private prison industrial complex in the United States. So, cops are picking up these young males all the time for gang banging and selling drugs and going around with guns and jacking cars and all of this, throwing them into jail. And there's a consistent profit there for the shareholders in this industry because it is an industry. So that's the most obvious example of how rap music was being used for, very nefarious aims. There are many others as well. When you look at what passes for hip hop now, it is straight up satanic. There's no other way of putting it. It's absolutely awash with dark occult symbolism in the music videos, in the imagery, in the lyrics. When you look at the way the artists are presented, even some of the artists' names, there's a rapper called Lil Uzi Vert. And when you say his name really quickly, it sounds like Lucifer. Lil Uzi Vert, Lucifer. So that's what they're conveying. And it's blatant Luciferianism, Satanism, dark occult ritual going into these records. The production styles now sound very satanic to me. I refer to it as demonic sonics. It sounds to me like with certain recordings, and this is becoming very consistent, it's as if there are demonic entities trying to break through out of the recording. And it wouldn't surprise me if these records have been imbued at the production process with some kind of dark demonic energy, because this is a very real thing, it turns out. And just the sound frequencies just don't sit well with a lot of people. Anyone of my generation, basically, that listens to this output. And I have conversations with people of my age, and they all say the same thing. That when they switch on the radio now and you get what passes for so-called hip-hop, so-called urban music, and a lot of pop music as well, they just can't stand to listen to it. It panics them, it makes them feel really uneasy, and they've got to reach for the off button as quickly as possible. It's certainly that way with me. So I can trace a definite degradation of the music, and it's not just down to me becoming old. It's down to having a point of reference. You know, if you're 17, 18, and you're just coming up in the scene and you're being entrained to accept all this stuff and it's all you've ever known, you think artists like, you know, Young Thug and Migos and Big Sean and French Montana and 2 Chainz and Cardi B and Nicki Minaj and all these artists are the bomb because it's great. It's your generation. They're speaking to you. They're the voice of the youth, you know. But if you're someone that remembers the golden era of rap music in the early 90s, you place that product side by side with what we're getting now, and it's undeniable that it's debased, and it's undeniable that it's systematic. It's not just the way things go. People say, oh, scenes just evolve in that way, and you know, it's just the way it goes in time, and it's a natural process. It's absolutely not. Social engineering is very real. There are so many examples of this. I give them in my books. There are people who do sit around tables and collude with each other as to how to have a controlling effect on large numbers of people through music, through popular culture. And that's what's going on. Hi to the cat.
That's my neighbor's cat. So are you still working as a DJ after all these experiences?
Well, not really, not in any meaningful sense. I do the odd party here and there, and I play the odd. What I'm doing a lot of now is conscious music sets. So a couple of weekends ago, I was at the Open Minds Ireland conference, and that's one of these get-togethers over a weekend where you get consciously aware people who assemble to listen to a bunch of speakers talking about truth issues, conspiracy, natural health, spirituality, natural law, this type of stuff. And they're a good sort of gathering for me to play the conscious music that I play on the Sound of Freedom. So this is music with a message that speaks to you, that inspires you, that articulates what's on your mind. It's all the stuff that you don't hear on the radio, but there is still a lot of great music out there. So I love doing sets like that where I can expose that type of music to people that are going to appreciate the message of it. But I don't do many of those now. And to be honest with you, I do miss it. You know, I'm not going to lie. I spent 20 odd years as a full-time DJ. My life just consisted of going to clubs, going to parties, playing music on the radio. And that was my identity. So if you'd asked me, you know, 15 years ago, who are you? What are you? What do you do? I'd have said, I'm a music guy. I'm a DJ. That's my life. It's the only thing that matters to me. So now the only thing that matters to me in my life at this point is truth. I want the truth of the matter no matter what, regardless of how unsettling it is, how inconvenient it is. I always want to know truth, and I put that above everything else. But I do miss the DJing from time to time because you get a buzz out of it. You get caught up in the energy of it. And yeah, I miss those times. But I can't do it anymore because, first of all, let's be honest, nobody wants to book me. Nobody wants that crazy conspiracy guy in their club, you know. So I've fallen out of contact with all the promoters and all the club managers and all the other DJs I used to know. The ones that still follow me on Facebook, no doubt, think that I'm just some nutter that's lost my mind, the same way I used to think about David Icke. So nobody would want me anyway. But also the music that's around right now, I don't want to be associated with it in any way. You know, I'm out there exposing this stuff and talking about the agendas that are in place. I can't very well be out there promoting and playing this music then. So the only kind of sets that I can do now are old school ones where I'm playing revivals, throwbacks from better years. I enjoy doing that, you know, playing 70s, 80s, 90s music, but anything after 2000, why would you?
Yeah. So what we find with a lot of these so-called superstars is when you look into their background, there's a lot of, you have parents in the military, intelligence services, and or sometimes doctors. So what's going on there?
Well, my research has really borne this out over the last few years. And I would say when it comes to the family backgrounds and affiliations of major artists, and not just musicians, but anyone that's in the public eye, because I look into, other professions as well. So it could be Hollywood actors, it could be television presenters, it can be newsreaders, it can be politicians, it can be business leaders. My research and that of many others has borne out time and time again that what you get consistently is family backgrounds steeped in, as you say, military activity, aspects of the military, the army, the navy, the air force, the marines, military intelligence. You find connections going into the CIA, MI6, the Tavistock Institute, these think tank organizations that are all to do with social engineering and changing culture through entertainment and through just changing social habits, this kind of thing. So you find links there going into Stanford Research Institute, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Esalen Institute, Harvard and Yale, these sorts of places, Oxford and Cambridge universities here in the UK. You find fathers who were doctors that were engaged in mind control research. We get that quite a lot. And so what I've been able to conclude from all of this is that when it comes to all these industries and all these different ways of life that affect large numbers of people, so that's entertainment, it can be politics, or all these other things that I mentioned, the controllers of these industries, because when you get far enough up the pecking order, you find it's the same individuals and the same organizations that affect all these different walks of life. What they're doing is picking their chosen ones to be the heads of these different entertainment walks of life. And they want everything kept in-house. So they're creating your heroes for you. They're telling you who to worship and who to revere and who to put up there on a pedestal. We could think of people like Stephen Hawking, who apparently passed away the other year. I think there are at least 4 or 5 different Stephen Hawkings, but whatever the case, we're told that the guy, passed away. But during the time that he was around, he was held up as a genius, this intellectual giant. And the general public was entrained to think of him as this incredibly smart guy. And you have to hang on his every word, read everything that he says through his voice box, And we're getting the same thing now with the likes of Brian Cox. God, do I really have to mention his name? Professor Brian Cox. There's a great example of a lifetime actor, which is a term I've used a lot in recent years. This guy was a keyboardist in a bloody dance pop band called D-Ream in the early 90s. There's footage of him looking very effeminate with his flowing locks and, dancing around behind a keyboard. Then a few years later, he gets put out there as this brilliant astrophysicist, Professor Brian Cox. He's a genius. He's the guy that's got all the answers. If you want to know anything about our cosmology, just ask Brian Cox. He's the go-to guy. So he's a classic example of someone that's manufactured as an A-lister, a celebrity, and they're put up there on a pedestal, and most people just go along with the programming because they never think to question it, and they conclude that Brian Cox is a genius. So we get loads of people like this served up to us all the time. What's actually happening is they're giving us these people, and many times they come from important family bloodlines that go back many, many generations. This is a very important aspect as to how social engineering and mind control gets done. It's kept in the family so often. So if people read Dave McGowan's book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which is one that really got me started in this style of research, Dave sadly passed away 4 years ago. I think it's 4 years to the day in 2 days' time. But he left behind an incredible piece of work which focused on the music scene coming out of Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles in the mid to late 1960s. And in that book, he was able to demonstrate how every single prominent and influential musician from that scene had family backgrounds going into military intelligence and aspects of the military. So that inspired me to start looking at other scenes and other movements, and you find exactly the same thing. You can look at punk and new wave, you can look at the electronic dance scene, you can look at rock music, you can look at heavy metal, you can look at any play out of entertainment that you choose, and you'll find the same thing. You find families going back into these institutions, and when it's not that, you're getting chosen ones, who are people who exhibit a certain amount of skill and talent, which gets spotted by those whose job it is to keep an eye on such things. And these people are taken aside and they're quite literally made an offer they can't refuse. Often these people are narcissistic. Often they want fame and fortune and personal gain above all else. And these industry spotters are able to identify these traits in people. So when they're taken aside by one of these industry representatives and told, you can be rich and famous beyond your wildest dreams and have all the money and all the yachts and all the mansions and all the sports cars you could ever dream of and all the drugs you could ever dream of, all you've got to do is come over to us, sign on the dotted line, and leave the rest to us. That's how they recruit many people. And of course, they sign that contract. They don't really have any conception of what it is they're getting into, but by God, they find out soon enough, because the minute you say yes to that, you're doing what you're told for the rest of your days. And that's how these industries are so controlled. And it's been that way right from the very start.
Mm-hmm. Roughly 2 weeks ago, I talked to a young gentleman and explained that I'm going to do this interview with you, and I explained a little bit of your work, what it's all about. And then he said to me, well, I can give you one example where that is not true, and that is Elton John. And I thought, hilarious.
Is he kidding? He's one of the best examples we have.
Okay, please go ahead. I promised him to address that.
Well, first of all, he's a Sir, isn't he? He's Sir Elton. That alone tells you all you need to know. Because the British honours and knighthood system, which creates Sirs and Lords and MBEs and OBEs and CBEs, is absolutely corrupt to the core and is absolutely awash with paedophiles. Let's be honest about it. You know, Sir Jimmy Savile, Sir Cyril Smith, Lord Greville Janner, Lord McAlpine, Sir Edward Heath. All these people have been exposed as having been prolific child molesters, to put it politely. And, you know, it's all connected into royalty. We just had the Prince Andrew situation. I don't know how much people are up on that, but Prince Andrew gave this interview just the other day, apparently trying to defend himself as to why he remained friends with Jeffrey Epstein, this other notorious paedophile, and stayed at his house and visited his island and went on his private jet and all this. It was an absolutely pathetic piece of damage limitation, because you watch that and you realize from the way he was acting that he's guilty as hell. He didn't even deny any of it. All he could say is, I have no recollection of meeting that woman. This particular woman who was 17 at the time, who claims that she was pimped out to Andrew by Jeffrey Epstein as a sex-trafficked slave. And Andrew had his way with her, you know. He wasn't even denying it. He was just saying, I have no recollection of meeting her, because he probably, in the back of his mind, is aware that some other evidence could well come out that proves, beyond any doubt, that he did know her. And he doesn't want to be on record as having lied about it. So the whole thing was just squirmingly embarrassing. But there you have a connection between royalty and pedophilia, and it's not the first one we've had, because Sir Jimmy Savile was a close personal friend of Prince Charles and the Queen, and often used to go and spend time at Buckingham Palace. So there's quite a lot of questions to answer there, really, isn't there, as to the true nature of royalty and the British honours system. And it's just corrupt to its core. I mean, Sirs are a representation of the British Empire, going back to those days. And what did the British Empire do? In the name of the monarch, it went all around the world, invading countries, subjugating their populations, enslaving them, forcing them to adopt different religious habits, forcing them to become revering of the British monarchy. You know, that's its history. It's bloodthirsty, it's violent. Why would you want to be associated with something like that? It's all stoking of the ego. When people take a knighthood, when they accept becoming a sir or a lord, it's to puff up their chest and make them feel good about themselves, because it's all about them. It's narcissistic again. It's just playing to their ego, and making them feel good about themselves. They're not thinking about the wider aspects of what all this represents. So Elton John is a Sir. You know, we've got Sir Mick Jagger, we've got Sir Paul McCartney, we've got, I think Tom Jones is a Sir. And it's obvious these people are just being rewarded for decades of service to the cause because they've played the game, they've pushed agendas. Elton John is an occultist. He's one of many musicians that have been into the works of Aleister Crowley, a dark occultist. You know, this is not occultism for the upliftment and benefit of all humanity. This goes into ritual magic and ceremonial magic, sex magic, all of this. And all of these things are aspects of Satanism. And Satanism, when you get down to the true nature of that, is all about me, me, me. It's all about personal gain, service to self, as opposed to service to creation and service to others. That's what true Satanism is. And Elton John and all these others have bought into that, and it's a big part of, you know, their identity. Same thing with Jimmy Page, who's got a very deep association with Aleister Crowley, and you find it in the Rolling Stones. You even find it in the Beatles when you go digging into background aspects of the Beatles. So all these people, you just don't get to these prominent positions unless you're playing the game. This is the whole point of, you know, my work. It's the whole crux of what I do. Anyone who is a household name celebrity that you've heard of, if you go out in the street and you say to the first passerby you meet, have you heard of such and such? If the answer is yes, then they've been given that career, because you don't get to that kind of influential position on your own, just through working hard, just through good luck. It doesn't happen that way.
Another thing that I found with Elton John, that his father was a lieutenant in the Royal Air Force. So there we have...
It's a good job I'm sitting down. I'd be so surprised at that otherwise.
Yeah, so that even that pattern repeats itself with him. So you already said these careers are given to those people. So now, what if somebody is really talented as a musician, a singer, or whatever? Should they pursue that career? And if they do, what should they keep in mind?
That's a very good question, and it's one I've had a few times. I often get it from parents of, you know, kids who want to make it big in the music industry, and these parents will say to me, my son or my daughter has a great musical talent, or they write great songs, and they want to be successful. But I've read your books and now I don't want them to go into the industry. What would you suggest? So I think people should always follow their dreams in terms of fulfilling their natural skills and talent. Because like I said earlier, with the kind of conscious music that I play on the Sound of Freedom, and hardly anyone else does. I mean, I would like there to be thousands of DJs out there pushing this kind of music, but I don't see it. But nevertheless, this music is out there. And if you are someone that can write great songs and does have musical talent, then you can be making music that does inspire other people and does uplift them and does communicate important messages. Because what a lot of people say to me in response to the shows that I put out is a really well produced and really well thought out 3 to 4 minute record can have such an incredible impact on a listener that it's the same as them having attended a 2-hour lecture or read a 600-page book in terms of how that message stays with them if it's done in a really effective way. So just at the Ireland conference the other weekend, where I played this kind of music in the bar, I had people running up to me when I was playing certain songs and saying, wow, who is this? What is this? I've got to get this, and taking down a note of the artist and the song, because they're just quietly sat there taking in these lyrics and they're thinking, wow, this is powerful. This is really speaking to me, you know. So a really well-crafted song can do that. So people should absolutely pursue their skill and their talent if they have that. But there are some warning signs to be wary of and to watch out for, because I think that there comes a point where you get an offer of being recruited and being enlisted and being, that's a different cat, isn't it?
Yeah, that's mine.
I swear that's a different one to the other one.
Yeah, that is my naughty boy.
All right. Well, my skills of observation are not failing me. So I think there comes a point where when your skill has been noted and these people that keep an eye on such things consider that you could be an asset to the industry and you could be someone that they could utilize, they're going to come to you and make you an offer of elevating you a few rungs up the ladder. And that's the point at which people have to be very vigilant. There's an old maxim that my dad used to say to me, and it's a very simple one. Well, there's two actually. He used to say, if something seems too good to be true, it is. And also the old maxim, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if somebody's coming to you and making you what appears to be an incredible offer, and they're putting all this on the table and you appear to be benefiting from it, you've got to ask yourself, what are they getting out of the deal? Because nobody gives you anything for nothing. So if you're being offered fame and fortune and wild riches, it's going to come at a price. They're going to expect things of you. And you need to ask yourself, what is going to be expected of you? And what it comes down to in these industries is the selling of your soul, it turns out. And that's not even a metaphorical kind of phrase. That's a literal thing, because you are giving over your humanity, your very soul to these organizations when you cross that certain point. So I think there's a lot of value in people remaining in the lower levels of the industry where they're not making a huge amount of money. They're not going to be a household name that everyone's heard of. They're not going to be up there with these idols that they have, but they're going to be retaining autonomy and independence over their output. They're going to be calling the shots. They're going to still be making the kind of music that they want to make, making the kind of statements they want to make, rather than being told what to do by a controller or a handler. And I think if people can be content with sitting at that level and just doing what they want to do, making enough money to get by on, but not enough to be buying mansions and yachts, if you're happy with that, then I think you can have a very fulfilling existence. But just be very wary of when that offer comes along. And I would actually advise anyone against signing with any major record label, to be honest with you. You know, there are small independents, but then there are the ones that we've all heard of, Sony and Warner Brothers and Universal Music Group and all these. And I would suggest that it's never a good idea to get involved with any of these companies, because that's where all the really dark stuff happens. And you could find yourself regretting that for the rest of your days.
Yeah, and some really big names had a lot of trouble with their record companies. And
yes, and it always seemed to turn out the same way for them. I don't know if you've noticed. You know, Michael Jackson got into some legal grapplings with his record company over his royalties and his publishing and his autonomy as an artist. And so did George Michael, and so did Prince. Now, what connects all those three artists? I can't quite think. Oh, yeah, they're all dead. Or so we're told, anyway.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Felix. He usually doesn't do that. That other one, she comes along, but he is usually, yeah, okay. Whatever.
He's enjoying the conversation.
That cannot be, that my attention is not on him.
Well, you know, maybe he's the reincarnation of, I don't know, Brian Jones or Jimi Hendrix or somebody like that.
So certain bands are created to, let's say, initiate a certain zeitgeist, a change in society. Okay. Yep.
Well, we get that. So every now and again, they want to shift the focus in terms of what they want to achieve. So the best example of it, and the one that gets endlessly brought up, is the counterculture scene of the mid to late 1960s, the flower power, hippie era, the psychedelic scene. And of course, we had all the bands coming out of Laurel Canyon that helped roll that whole thing out. The Beatles played the major role in that whole thing, and the likes of the Rolling Stones and the Doors and Pink Floyd, you know, were all instrumental in getting these ideas into society. But as you move into different eras, the music changes and you get different scenes and different fashions and different trends. And this is another thing for people to be wary of, because whenever there's any kind of movement or trend or scene, these things don't happen naturally either. I know people love to think that they do, but there are organizations that specialize in creating these things. The Tavistock Institute is the masterclass example, but there are others as well. And it's, people have full-time jobs in working out how to change societal attitudes and how to change people's perceptions of things and how to change lifestyle habits and all of this. And we've got some examples going on right now. Here we are on the cusp of 2019 going into 2020. We've got the transgender agenda in full flow, because that's what it is. It clearly bears all the hallmarks of being something that's been orchestrated. It's been cooked up by these social engineers in these think tanks. They're changing people's perceptions towards gender and sexuality and non-binary ideas and all this stuff. And, this is not representing any kind of group's interests. This is not about respecting the individual lifestyle choices of certain people. This is about forcing society to think in different ways about these things. And it ties into bigger and wider agendas. So at the same time we've had all this going on, you've got the transhumanist AI agenda. We've got the rollout of the smart grid Internet of Things. We've got 5G about to be rolled out everywhere. And all these things are connected. So 5G plays into the Internet of Things, where everything's going to be wirelessly communicating with everything else. And every electronic device you can think of is going to be sending out radio signals, microwave signals that are going to play into this thick soup of EMFs and RFID signals and all of this. And we're going to be absolutely engulfed in all this radiation everywhere. But of course, because you can't see it, it happens on an unseen level. People aren't really talking about it and nobody really considers it a threat. That's how they're slipping this one under the radar. But all this is about to happen. And so you find in the production methods behind music now, everything is electronically produced. It's all digital. Even the methods by which music is delivered are digital. So people are just streaming music now off a site, or they're downloading MP3s. Nobody's even buying CDs anymore. Forget vinyl. Vinyl went out a long time ago. And people aren't even bothering with CDs. So everything in terms of the way people listen to their music and also watch their movies, people don't have DVDs anymore, or even Blu-ray. People now are streaming movies and downloading movies. That's partly how 5G is being sold to us. They're saying, why wait 6 minutes to download a movie when you could have it in 30 seconds? Isn't that great? Never mind that your whole family is going to go down with cancer from the radiation. That's a small price to pay, but think about that movie, eh? So, everything is becoming electronic. And people are being entrained to think about technology as really great. Technology is your friend. Technology is the future. Look at the way we go about our daily lives now. In most countries, you go into the average supermarket, and rather than go up to a human being to pay, you're coerced to go and use these electronic machines and pay with your credit card. Increasingly now it's contactless, so you're just waving the card in front of the reader, And they're working around, of course, to a cashless society, where cash will be a thing of the past and everything will be done electronically. They're working around to trying to coerce people into taking microchip implants so that all their financial data and all their personal details can be held, on a chip within them. So we're only a few steps away from that, because people are loving flashing their cards around and paying by contactless. So it's only a couple of steps down the line. And we're being entrained to get ready for all of this and accept it. And that is achieved to a very large extent through popular culture. It would be much more difficult for them to get people to accept these different ways of doing things in their daily lives if they didn't have music and movies and TV and also video games to rely on. So you're finding the same themes coming through in all these different aspects of technology. It's a reverence and a worshipping of technological ways of doing things. So that's the way they're getting ready to bring in the transhumanist AI society, which is not a great idea for the future of humanity. These aren't natural ways to live. It's anti-creation, it's anti-life, it's anti-God. There's no two ways about it. And people need to be very wary of this. But because things are brought in under the guise of entertainment, and it's done subliminally, it's done very stealthily, people don't realize they're being conditioned and mind controlled to accept these things. And they would be hard pressed to explain how these ideas have even got into their mind in the first place. Because when you hear it through a favorite piece of music, when you see one of your artists who you love promoting this kind of imagery in one of their promotional shots or one of their videos or whatever, it's being absorbed by your consciousness, but it's in your subconscious, so you're not aware that it's happened. But nevertheless, the idea has been implanted and that seed has been sown in you. So it's an absolutely ingenious way of doing it, and they're past masters at getting this job done because they've been doing it for decades and decades. They just changed the tactics slightly, they changed the complexion of it in different times. They roll out these different scenes and movements, and every now and again they'll refresh their artist roster, they'll kick the old names off and bring in some new ones, but the agenda stays the same no matter what.
Yeah, and I would say once you have everybody confused about even their own gender, it's easier to convince them to merge with the machine. Yeah,
yeah, it's all part of the same process.
Yeah. So what about traditional music? I'm asking that because I worked many years in aviation, and I remember we spent a lot of time in Abu Dhabi, and then the way it went was, okay, first you watch the belly dancer, then you dance with her, and later on you go belly dancing somewhere. And these, of course, were all handmade music, and what the tribes have played for centuries practically. So would that be a safe area?
Well, it'd be a damn sight safer than listening to the average Nicki Minaj or Cardi B record, yeah, for sure. When it comes to tribal sort of ancestral cultural music, I've not looked into that in a big way, but the common denominator between all of it in these different parts of the world seems to be that the music goes hand in hand with dance ceremonies and kind of ritualistic activity. And often in certain cultures, you find the ingestion of psychedelics as well, what are also known as entheogens or plant medicines. And it seems to be a combination of the music and particularly the rhythms, the drum patterns. You get this in a lot of shamanic traditions. You know, it's all about the beat of the drum. The dance group called the Shaman, actually, who were very big in the acid house rave scene in the early 90s, had a record called Boss Drum, where they were talking about these ancient primal states that can be awakened in mankind through listening to rhythmic drumming, if it's done in a certain way. So you have a combination of the rhythm of the music, the dance, the ceremony that people get involved with, and the alteration of their conscious state through the taking in of these plant medicines, which seems to awaken something primal within people. And what's actually been happening with a lot of modern, more mainstream music scenes is there's been a deliberate effort to recreate these conditions and reawaken these states within people. So that, again, went on a lot in the 60s with the LSD hippie scene. You had a bunch of social engineers there. There were a series of conferences that took place, I think it was the 1940s going into the 50s, called the Macy Conferences in New York. And they spoke in those of their desire to change culture and change the fabric of society and ways in which that could be achieved. And they spoke about changing it through music. And there was also talk of what they referred to as an archaic revival, which goes back into what I just mentioned. It's reawaking these states that are absolutely inherent to us as humans. And they wanted to achieve that again through the music and the culture of the 1960s. They were planning way ahead of it. Now, people could argue that there's nothing inherently wrong with getting involved in ritualistic activity like that if you're raising your consciousness and if you're doing it in a beneficial kind of way, and there isn't. But the problems start to arise when this occurs on somebody else's terms and you don't know who that somebody else is. So if social engineers are at the helm, and if they're tied in with military intelligence operations, you can bet they're not trying to do all this for the betterment and upliftment of all humanity. It's not because they want you to have a better time. It's not because they want you to assert your spirituality and achieve these higher states. It's because they want to control you, because these organizations are all about control. And the other play out of this in more recent times has been the electronic dance music scene. I've done a lot of research into this. It figures in my second book, Musical Truth 2, a couple of big chapters there. And I'm talking about how in the late 80s going into the 90s, particularly in the UK, when you had the acid house scene and then the rave scene, which gave way to all the big super clubs and the influx of dance music leading up to what we have today, electronic dance music tied in with transhumanism and all this. A lot of what was going on there with these early raves and these dance festivals was a reawakening of those very same primal states. So you had the rhythm and the sound coming through the music recordings. You had the togetherness of the people, the communal spirit of all these people coming together and all sharing this experience. You also had imagery and symbolism. This is another big part of it. When you look back at ancient cultures, you can find things like inscriptions on caves where they were expressing themselves in signs and sigils going back thousands of years. So this is another archetype which is very deeply embedded within the human psyche, the recognition of certain signs and symbols, and what that brings about in your conscious state when you recognize what that symbol is. So in the dance music scene, the rave festivals of the early 90s, you had all this imagery being flashed up, these visuals, and a lot of it was metaphysical, spiritual. You had a lot of UFO and alien symbolism going in there, and it was all obviously controlled by these agencies that wanted to implant these ideas into the consciousness of these very vulnerable, very susceptible young people, because the other aspect of it, of course, is the drugs. And when you go back to these shamanic tribal cultures, you know, the drugs were in the form of plant medicines or psychedelics and entheogens. But by the time you've got up to the modern dance music scene, they're anything but natural. You've got kids taking ecstasy and cocaine and God knows what else. And all this stuff is chemically produced in laboratories by who knows who knows where, and who knows what's being put into it. When you pop an E, you have no idea what you're putting into your body and into your mind. You have no idea what effect this is going to have because it's on somebody else's terms. Again, when things are occurring on somebody else's terms and you don't know who that somebody else is, that's going to be a problem. And this reminds me of a famous quote by Edward Bernays, you know, the father of propaganda, public relations, who in the opening page to his 1928 book, Propaganda, wrote something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, you know, our thoughts, our tastes, our ideas are all shaped and molded by men whose names we don't know. So he was in a position to know. He summed it up right there. We have social engineers and architects of our daily experiences, and we have no idea who these people are, but they are shaping and molding our experiences and our perceptions. So it pays for people to be vigilant in such cases. I would suggest we need to know who it is that's changing our ideas and changing our consciousness and what interest they have in doing that. Because again, unfortunately, unpopular information I know, that the world in which we live is not one where we have a control system that are looking out for us and just want what's best for us and want to help us all. That's what we're trained to believe, but the opposite is actually the case.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, there is a claim that Madonna did a reversal of Kabbalistic magic at the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't believe that. And I have to say, I think the Eurovision Song Contest has some very occult streaks now. And But what you know about Madonna and what you found out about her, do you think that's even possible?
I do think it's possible
Okay.
because I've come to realize that almost anything is possible in terms of what these very sick psychopathic individuals get up to, and they're all dark occultists. Let's never forget
Mm,
that the people that are running all these institutions, you know, they have these very respectable exteriors, and even when you look at groups like the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and all these organizations that we know about, we know they exist. We know they get together and plan things, but they'll all turn up in suits and get out of limousines, and they've got this very respectable kind of exterior, and they'll always tell you that it's harmless and they're just meeting to talk about innocent things and all this. But what goes on behind the scenes after hours is anybody's guess, because as well as being controllers of culture and influencers of business and things like this, these people are dark occultists, and they all adhere to this very ancient religion that goes back many, many generations. It plays itself out as aspects of Satanism and Luciferianism, but it's very much steeped in ritual. And so what we've had a lot of in recent years is with shows like the Grammys and the VMAs and the Super Bowl halftime show, and increasingly now the Eurovision Song Contest, incredibly, is public displays of occult rituals. The
mm,
London 2012 Olympics was a great example of this. There's been much analysis done of it. The worldwide audience for that event was millions upon millions upon millions. So this is the first point in history that these occultists have had to influence the consciousness of such large numbers of people through events such as this. And again, ingeniously, it's all presented as entertainment. So people look at the Super Bowl halftime show and they think, oh, it's just Madonna coming out and singing a few songs. And they notice that she's got all this regalia and all this decor and stuff, but they think nothing of it. They think, oh, it's just all part of the show, the entertainment, the pomp and the glamour of it all, you know. But what's actually happening is they're shoving all this stuff right in front of your nose. So they're giving you Freemasonic imagery, they're giving you ancient Egyptian imagery, they're giving you Kabbalistic imagery, they're giving you symbols and signs and sigils out of all kinds of occult mystery school traditions. And 99.9% of people have no idea it's going on, but it's still affecting them subconsciously. So the Eurovision Song Contest, you know, never used to be up there with the Grammys and all the rest of them. I remember the days of Bucks Fizz, you know, making your mind up, and those girls getting their skirts ripped off and all this. And I go back even to Brotherhood of Man, you know, I can remember that. And it just seemed to be this very cheesy, you know, very uncool, crappy pop show. But now the Eurovision has got very dark. And
mm,
this year's event with Madonna, she came out with her eye patch on. So she was presenting this Madam X persona, this mind control altar that she's got. You know, that was the first kind of big public display of that. And she's singing this song there with this sort of black reggae type guy, and it's this jaunty, jiggy kind of song that sounds all very jolly. But when you study the lyrics, she's talking about depopulation agendas. It's an ode to eugenics. She's talking about not all of you are going to make it into the future.
mm.
And it's a very, very dark message set to this jiggly kind of nice pop beat. So that's pretty dark. And it's not as if that's the first time we've had stuff like that from Madonna. So there was the show several years ago. I forget which one it was. It may have been the Grammys, where she's on there with Britney Spears. And she famously gives Britney Spears a full kiss on the lips as part of this ritual. And I think this is the one where previously she had descended down from 13 steps on a pyramid, go figure, down onto the stage. So there's more symbolism being shoved into our faces there. So she kisses Britney Spears on the lips, and a lot of people considered that to be a kind of initiation ceremony of Britney into the industry. So she was going to be the next hugely manipulated pop puppet, and how she was, you know, mind controlled and all the rest of it. And Madonna was playing her part in that. So it's as if she was passing the baton on to Britney Spears. And another thing about Madonna, it's an anecdote that I've often told, but it really fits here, so I'll tell it again. And I mention it in my Musical Truth 1 book. When her record Justify My Love came out in 1990, There was actually a feature on a TV show here in the UK where they were saying that there's a section of that song where if you play it backwards, the lyric comes out sounding like "Here, I love Satan," or "Hear us, love us, Satan. I love Satan." So this is another play out of the backmasking dynamic that we've heard so much about over the years. The classic example of that is Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, where if you take a certain section of it and reverse it, you get lyrics like "Here's to my sweet Satan" coming out. And people will argue about this all day long, and the naysayers will claim that you're just hearing it because you want to hear it, and it's not really there. But there is a very real science to backmasking and also reverse speech therapy. There are practitioners in this field who will tell you that messages come out in speech in backwards form that can be discerned and understood if you really pay attention to what's going on, because of the way our minds work and because of the inversion process that we get everywhere in nature and creation. So scientists will tell you that when you see an image, before your brain processes it, the image that's being taken in through your cornea in your eyes is effectively upside down. And your brain works to flip it round the right way up, in inverted commas, so that your brain registers that image. You might have seen footage of old photographers where they used to have these cameras on tripods and they'd put a cloth over their head, and when they're looking through the lens at the subject they want to photograph, it's upside down. But then in the process of taking the picture, it's flipped up the right way. Well, apparently this happens in speech as well. So we can discern messages in speech forwards as well as backwards, because again of the way our brain works with that type of inversion. So this happens in song lyrics as well. And in this record, Justify My Love, I remember getting this record because I'd seen this feature claiming there was a satanic message in it, and putting it onto a reel of tape in this radio station where I used to work, and turning it round and playing it backwards. And it chilled me to the bone because it was like 3 o'clock in the morning in this dark studio, and I played the record backwards, and it sounds all kind of very disturbing and quite demonic, that record. And then I got this line, "I love Satan." And I ran next door to get the DJ that was on air at the time at the radio station. And I said to him, "God, you've got to come in here and listen to this. This is crazy." And when we got back in the studio and I rewound the tape to play it, the tape was completely empty. It had disappeared. And I have no explanation for how that happened. But it is an anecdote I like to tell. It does play into what you just mentioned about that Kabbalistic, ritualistic inversion, which could well be a very real thing. And, you know, there's many other things with Madonna. She's very deeply into it. She sold her soul long ago. And would you believe her father, it turns out, served time in the military? Astounding, I know. But there's another example of a lifetime actor and someone that's pushed into one of these public roles and given this career. Because when you do Madonna's family tree, I presented this in a recent talk that I gave, you find out that one way or another, as cousins, you know, it's like 9th or 10th cousins and all this kind of thing, but one way or another, her extended family tree links her to George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, Celine Dion, and all kinds of other unlikely people. And what you come to realize is that all these people, whether it's George Bush, whether it's Celine Dion, are given these roles. They don't just work their way up. They don't just get lucky. It's given to them. It's like, George, you're going to be US president. Celine, you're going to be a singer. Get into these foundations, these training schools. Get your singing skills straight, because we're going to make you a big singing star. Brad, you're going to be an actor. Get to acting school, learn how to act. You're going to be in Hollywood movies. That's the way it's done. And Madonna, again, a quote that I used in a public talk recently, in the intro to a video that she put out in the 80s, she came out with some bullshit like, you know, "I came to New York, I didn't know anyone, I wanted to be famous, I wanted to be successful, I worked really hard, I wrote a few songs, I learned how to dance, I followed my dream, and my dream came true." And that is the way people are trained to think about how you get famous. Young people, kids, are fed this myth that if you want to be the next Madonna, if you want to be the next Miley Cyrus, if you want to be the next Ariana Grande, all you have to do is just work really hard, follow your dream, always want it, keep focused, and you too could get there. Well, you couldn't if your family is not one of these important bloodlines, or if you don't get selected as one of these chosen ones. That's the way it works.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. I know you have little time today, but I thank you very much for coming on. That was great. We have to do it again. And I don't care if I have to wait.
Well, yeah, I could probably fit you in about 2 years.
Yeah, no problem. I waited.
No, actually, seriously though, in a couple of years, I'm going to have Musical Truth 3 on the streets, because it's become clear that this shit never ends, and there's never going to be any shortage of stories to tell and information to convey. So I already know that there is going to be a Musical Truth 3.
Okay.
So I'm just about to self-publish my debut novel. So I've got a piece of allegorical fiction called The Cause and the Cure, which is due to drop any time now, in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And I love the process of putting that together. That's my first piece of fiction that I've ever written. But the next book is going to be Musical Truth 3. And I have to knuckle down at some point and gather together all my information and work out how I'm going to put that one across.
Okay. So thank you very much for coming. And I will link everything below. So that was it. Night Flight for today. Take good care of yourselves. Stay safe and sound. And thank you, Mark.
All right. Thanks for having me.